Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am at AK Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 145. And this episode, we're sort of doing a follow-up on one of the panels that Matt was on at PAX East this year. The GameCube is the greatest console of all time. We're going to talk a little bit about the GameCube. And to further that conversation, we are joined by the creator, the moderator of that panel, previous guest and friend of the show, Jacob McCourt. Mr. McCourt, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me. Would this be my fourth appearance, I think, if you count
Side Quest, yeah, it's your fourth time on the feed.
I love it.
Yes.
Thank you for having me. It's going to be a fun
Fifth time you get a smoker jacket.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Five Timers Club. Let's go.
There we go.
There you go. You'll get it. So before we get into the retrospective of the GameCube, why don't you just let folks know, because the GameCube panel that we did, that you were gracious enough to have me on, is out in the Left Behind Game Club feed. It's on your YouTube channel. So just tell folks a little bit. We'll link it in the show notes, but a little bit about what that panel was about, what we did.
So the panel itself was kind of split into two sections. The first section was a very brief history of the console. We talked about what happened at the launch titles, some of the weird history. We showed Jason Alexander's wonderful face playing Metroid Prime. And then after that, we invited the audience to help collaborate on a list of the 15 best games that ever came out for the console. And I don't know if in retrospect I fully agree with the list, but I think the list got most of the big bangers. So that was a panel, like you said, available in the Left Behind Game Club podcast feed, as well as on my YouTube channel. You can find it at Jacob McCourt, but we're going to plus it up today. So stay here if you want more, then go there, but stick around for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was not at the panel, and I definitely had to listen to it and make sure that, I wasn't overstepping on any toes here, because y'all got real good and deep into it. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely fantastic. And I definitely was taking notes for things and being like, I love the GameCube. It's one of my favorites as well. Such a formative experience for me. And I took all sorts of notes on it. And then I listened to the episode and I'm like, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. But you know what? I take that as a good thing.
Mm-hmm. And what's fun is I have some kind of extra notes that we got. So Janet Garcia, who was on the panel, was gracious enough to send a note to the Video Game History Foundation, and Kelsey over there sent us an amazing email with some great press assets, some photos, and some details that she was able to pull out of the different, magazines and whatnot that she had. And so I have a few facts that weren't on the panel. So, you're getting some bonus material here today.
Fantastic. And also, before we delve into this, I do want to say that we did something a little different for this episode. Matt put out into the social media world that we were going to be talking about this and asked for any contributions from other listeners, fellow podcasters, and anyone else that just wanted to be heard about this. And so we made notes of that, and we're going to try to get everybody's takes and opinions and things in here as well. Thank you so much, everybody that submitted favorites and memories. It really let us know how loved the GameCube is as a system and how excited I am to be talking about it.
Yeah, I think we should start by just talking about our early GameCube experience, right? When we got it. I mean, it's funny, I told this on the panel, but I remember specifically buying the GameCube a little late, maybe I think a year or maybe 6 months into its life cycle. Whenever the first price drop was, which I know was pretty early on, I bought it the week before. And so I remember spending the full price on it, and then the week after the price dropping. And this was before it was common knowledge. Oh, you just return it and rebuy it. That was just not a thing that my parents thought of and that I thought of. And of course, it was my saved money. It's just damn it.
Yep.
I also remember, I think one of the earliest games I got had to have been Luigi's Mansion. And then I think I also got Star Fox Adventures pretty early, and remembering, I remember enjoying that game, though never finishing it. And then not until years later, finding out that everyone I knew hated that game. I was like, why? I don't understand. It's wild. So for the listener, the younger listener, there was a time before Twitter and the internet when vitriol was ubiquitous. And so you could like bad things and no one would tell you otherwise. You could just enjoy those things.
Yeah.
It's sort of like how Donkey Kong 64, I was listening on another podcast recently, is this universally...
Great.
It's universally disliked, but at the time it was celebrated because critically it was great. Yep. But if you're not collecting everything, it's a fun game. But otherwise, it's if you want to 100% that game, it is not good.
I would call it not a great game, but a greatly beloved game by those that enjoy it.
And so it's funny because I feel like the GameCube was one of the first consoles besides the N64 where that was really kind of universal, but we also started to get those universal opinions as the internet grew, things especially Mario Sunshine being also pretty disliked or at least polarizing. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, Jeff, did you get the GameCube at launch? I can't remember.
I did not. For a long time, I was very much somebody who was, if not a generation behind on games, I was usually late to the party just because of saving up my own money. I like shopping deals. What can I say? And I've always been a game collector. And so, as a kid, we had the NES until like a year or two into the PS1. And then I had a PS1. And then I had that PS1 for a while. And I bought a GameCube I actually was mapping this out. I got it in early 2004. So it had been out for about 2.5 years at that point.
Right.
And it was a few months after the second price dropped down to $99. I was at a New Year's Eve party at a friend's house. This was my senior year of high school. And, staying up, playing video games and everything else. And we were playing a ton of GameCube. And I don't know, I'd played GameCube before, but for whatever reason, I just became deeply enamored by the discs. This was just one of those like delirious late night things. Just like, so cute. They're so good. And Morgan Shaver, thank you very much for sharing my love of the tiny discs. They are very cool and high tech. And I think, again, because the price drop had happened, I'm like, I got some Christmas money. Yeah, I'm going to go. Like a week or two after, I went into GameStop and I bought the platinum colored GameCube. Got the blingy one.
Yeah.
And I got 2 games. I'm trying to remember. I could only remember one of them. I think one of them was Super Mario Sunshine because we were playing a lot of that. But the other one was definitely Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem.
Nice.
Sure.
And it stands out because it was $12. because the GameCube was still current at that point and people weren't buying that game, so they were trying to move it.
Right.
It wasn't like the fact that Paper Mario Thousand Year Door was always $40 at any given point. So I didn't get that till well into adulthood.
Yeah.
But I picked up Eternal Darkness. I definitely got Mario Sunshine, if not when I got my GameCube, pretty soon after. And yeah, that was my next-gen console for a little while, and I loved that thing. Over the course of things, I ended up getting one of every major color controller.
Oh, wow.
The platinum, the black, the indigo, and the spice orange, because of the fact that my TV room, where I had all my old consoles and everything else plugged in, was a rat's nest of controller cables. And so the fact that the color of the controller was also the color of the connector that went into the GameCube, I was able to know what player was what by looking at the GameCube. There was some strategy to this, and it paid off a couple of times.
Yeah.
Certainly during Smash tournaments.
The GameCube has such little fun quirks beyond the one that you just mentioned. Even when you think about it, like the way that the lid opened to allow you to put the game in, like how many consoles beyond maybe the Dreamcast had that sort of like pop-up lid, but even like the little quirks of like press the actual place where the disc sits to have it pop out instead of just like being a grubby little kid who just tries to rip the game out and maybe breaks it, get your fingers on it. I just love with Nintendo console design, and we even kind of see it a little bit now, probably a little bit less, that it's just so quirky, and you only get that kind of thing from Nintendo.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
I mean, the very well-known Easter eggs of within the BIOS of, you start it up without the disc, the very ambient music that plays is in fact the jingle that plays when you start up the Famicom disk system slowed down 16 times. The very suits the time and suits the system, and it was very reminiscent of how the PS2 was, but it was still Nintendo. Or if you held the Z button on the first controller, the startup sound, which by the way, the effing startup sound of the GameCube is beyond reproach. And you'd get a different one if you held down the Z button, and then you get a different one if you held down the Z button on all 4 controllers. And to say that I was so excited when I got my 4th controller so that I could finally do that doesn't properly sell how hyped I was to hear a 3-second sound of wood blocks and stereotypical ninja noises. But I loved it.
Yeah.
Before we get too far ahead, Jacob, did you get the GameCube at launch as well?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't get to talk about this on the panel because I'm just like, everyone else talking. Let's get through this panel because we only have 60 minutes. But
And now you're the guest.
And now I'm the guest. So I got a GameCube at launch. Not at launch, but my mom got it for us right at the Christmas where it came out. And she did this very quirky thing that, I'll have to send this to her afterwards so that maybe she can shed a tear and hear how much it actually meant to me and my brother, or at least me, where she did that. And one last thing, but at Christmas morning, where we opened all our gifts and it was like a great Christmas. And then it's not like I'm like, oh, GameCube. Like, I didn't even think it was possible to get one because they were in such hot demand. But my mom did that. And one last thing where I think she handed us a game and we were like, wait, but this is for a GameCube. And then handed us the GameCube. It was something like that. And like my brother and I just played it nonstop. We got Smash Brothers for sure. And then I believe we also got Luigi's Mansion. And so
Nice.
She kind of made Christmas morning, and I don't think I ever say thank you to her enough for doing that and also getting the original Rock Band for us when it first came out. My mom always came in clutch Christmas morning, but no, that's how I got my GameCube, and like I own 2 GameCubes now. I basically got all Wavebirds, tons of games, including some rare ones. So we didn't give enough love to Cubivore on the panel, so I'm hoping I can do that today.
That's one of Jeff's favorites.
Geoff, let's go.
I've never played it. I've watched so much about it, though. I am like, it is a white whale for me.
What a weird game, huh?
Yeah. What a wild-ass game. Mm-hmm. And there's more than a few games that, living as an adult retro game collector, you have the I remember seeing it when I was a kid, but it was a little too expensive. And now as an adult, you look at it, it was $50. It was not expensive. I was just 12.
Yeah.
Because that game now goes for $300 if you can find it
Easily.
anywhere. And I bought it at a GameStop for like $50 maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 years after the GameCube came out. Like maybe at this point, 5 to 10 years ago. And I'm glad I haven't sold it. And it's one that I will keep forever. I will have a very small GameCube collection. It'll be like that and Ultimate Muscle, the wrestling game about anime, maybe Custom Robo, and a couple more. But like that'll be my collection as an adult. To my child one day, I will say, here are some great games that you need to play.
And they better enjoy it. At least try them out. It's like vegetables. You don't have to like it, but you have to try it, okay, kid? Give it a try.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely GameCube games were the ones where I, in college, for many reasons, some good, some terrible, sold most of my video game collection. And I was getting evicted. I needed the money.
Yep, I get it.
And ADHD was really bad, and this was an impulsive decision to be like, I'm going to be an adult, and I'm going to stop being distracted by things. Oh my God. I was late on a project because I couldn't do anything but play Pokemon Leaf Green. I'd beaten that game so many times, but it was just not understanding how neurodivergence works. I was just like, it's the video games that are the problem. And so sold most of them. And I would say I think all of the games that are the biggest hits to my heart of like, it's going to cost so much to get back. How could I get rid of this game? How could I whatever else? Were PS1 games and GameCube games. Getting Eternal Darkness back brought back a piece of my soul. I found a copy of it complete in box like 2 years ago, and it feels good. I still have my old Eternal Mode save file.
Wow.
It's been great. I got Ikaruga back finally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got Twin Snakes. They're not Cubivore levels, but definitely, and it feels real good to pop those back in, and they're just as good. It's a very funny thing about the GameCube that, there were a lot of things about it that when it launched made it a little bit an object of ridicule, or at least light joshing and ribbing. But nowadays, actually help it hold its place. Because, again, the small discs, they can't store as much. The GameCube was surprisingly powerful, as well as the fact that they were building for faster load times. And so going back and not having to deal with PS1, early PS2 era load times really helps you get into the games quickly and not have to be reminded of that or sit there and go, why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think when talking about the GameCube library, which we talked about a bit already, like, there's so many games that are still just trapped on the GameCube for better or worse. Like, tons of games that have been released on other consoles, but mostly only consoles of that generation. I mean, you think about Resident Evil 4, which is on everything, and then they just remade it and put it on everything. But then you look at games like Beautiful Joe that are trapped on the PS2 and this game, one of my favorites that I championed on the panel. But like, so many games like that, Wario World, the original Luigi's Mansion got a remake, and like now Mario Sunshine's on the Switch.
Killer 7.
Yeah.
But like, some of the Nintendo first-party games are coming, and then others are not. And some of the games have escaped to even Steam. But for the most part, a lot of like the best games or the most interesting games, Chibi Robo, Custom Robo, like all of these games, Eternal Darkness, are only available on the GameCube.
And it's a funny thing. And also you mentioning, Beautiful Joe and Resident Evil 4. And I remember being a GameCube owner and being very excited about what was called the Capcom 5.
Yeah.
Capcom, in terms of giving good third-party support to the GameCube, promising that they were making 5 games that were only going to be exclusive to the GameCube. One of them never came out, and I forever lament not getting to play Dead Phoenix. I want to be a fire-winged flyboy in a free-roaming shoot-'em-up. I want this. I need this. Damn it. Why? They're reviving so many things. Dead Phoenix. Maybe it's a meta title. Maybe it comes back. I don't know. PN03, Project Number 03, which still is a GameCube exclusive. And then it's like these highly exclusive games. Beautiful Joe that ended up on the PS2. Killer 7 ended up on the PS2. Resident Evil 4 only on the GameCube and the PS2 and the PS3 and the PS4 and
the Wii.
Steam.
And Wii. And
Steam.
iPods and Steam.
And Xbox 360.
And virtual reality. And exclusively a video game. and that was definitely one that everyone was really excited about. Amongst memories put up, Carlos Rodriguez from Nerdaday and Apron Work remembers dropping off like lunch money saved up every week towards a launch day pre-order of Resident Evil 4. It was big, and it was a while before it ever came to PS2, and it felt so cool, so good. Because along with that, you got Resident Evil 0 and the Resident Evil remake, which, oh my God, that felt incredible on the GameCube. That still holds up. I don't care.
Oh my God, that game, I have a hit or miss relationship with the Resident Evil series because I'm a coward. But I remember renting Resident Evil Remake because I was like, all right, I got to play this game. I've heard so many good things about it. And I got to the first puzzle, and like a zombie is coming off screen, and the lightning like struck, and I got so scared I turned it off. Like I don't even remember what scared me. I just turned it off. Meanwhile, I recently, within the last few years, played Resident Evil 4 finally on Steam and fucking loved it. Like, it was great. It's why I do want to play Remake, although I do hear it's a little scarier. But, like, I think what was interesting about the GameCube as a console is that you had to look for the gems, but they were there. And it also got a lot of really great ports. Like, talking about the Capcom stuff, leaving GameCube, it was the first generation where Sonic was on a Nintendo system. We got Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. Sonic Adventure, I'd watched my friend play that on Dreamcast for years, and I was like, oh, I wish I could have that game. And then it came out on the GameCube. I was so excited. The Sonic Mega Collection, the Sonic Gems Collection. Like, Sonic had huge representation on this console. Now it's like ubiquitous for Sonic to be on everything. But like back then, it was like, oh my God, I'm playing Sonic on a Nintendo console? Yeah, like it was just like, it was so unbelievable. And I mean, so many franchises launched and had definitive titles on this system too. Think about Pikmin 1 and 2, Wind Waker. Think about, some people consider still to be the best Mario Kart game ever made, Mario Kart Double Dash, and Animal Crossing, which was over in Japan an N64 game, but here was a GameCube game and one of the most, still to this day, one of the most successful Nintendo franchises, right?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. You know, Metroid made its pivot to 3D on this console successfully, seamlessly almost. Like, I think it's very easy to get bogged down in the GameCube being less powerful than the PS2 or the Xbox and like not being able to compete. But while sales might not have always been there, the quality was for sure there.
And I think that like in the lead up to the console coming out, they really positioned it differently than the N64, because if you remember, the N64 didn't have a lot of games, hard to develop for. Nintendo controlled on the manufacturing on the cartridges, so you know they said, hey, the mini disc is going to be revolutionary, it will replace the CD. These are actual things, did not happen. But really, like when they were going to developers, they're like, hey, this is more dev friendly to develop for, because Sony was kicking their butt with the PS1 because it was just so damn easy to develop for. I'm not a developer, but it was, from my understanding, way easier. Same. And even though they tried to come out with some weird accessories like an SD card based memory card that like didn't really come out, and then they tried was it the IQ? Did that come out for the...
That was the GameCube, the Panasonic IQ, the combination GameCube DVD player.
So they tried stuff, and like most of it only came out in Japan and like didn't make its way over to North America, but like I always appreciate them doing that kind of stuff, and it did have some bangers. Even games that only had like a character or something special on the GameCube version. So like a Soul Calibur 2 getting Link as the fighting game character in that one, where PS2 got Hayahachi and Xbox got Spawn. Like I think that Link got we got the best one on GameCube. But even those little flares for GameCube, I really enjoyed. I don't know how many other ones I can remember, but I do remember that like we got something special usually on a GameCube version.
Well, because you also had a good deal of history to work into it. You're able to get Link into Soul Calibur. I mean, Heihachi is a fighting game character and made by the same company that makes Soul Calibur. So, yeah, fully realized fighting game character. And a weaponless one and a weapon fighter? Oh my. Yeah. But Link has history, has variations of all of the releases, and you can do something really cool with that. Is one of the things I loved about playing Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, where you're able to have little Yoshi dolls and you could shoot it and Yoshi, and it does all that kind of a thing. But this also showcases something that I realized recently, to go slightly off track for a moment, it's going to come back, that most of the major console manufacturers bring who they were into the home console market. Sega were arcade developers. Yes, that's video games, but there's an arcade game mentality that comes from that, amusement park style. Nintendo was toy makers. Sony electronics, and Microsoft was PC software. And so this is where you're getting the way that Microsoft is integrated these days. And Sony always pushing whatever technology or disc media for each iteration. Nintendo absolutely going for the fun peripherals and the interesting ideas. And it's interesting, too, for me that when the Dreamcast fell, for all sorts of reasons that I only understood at 14 to be about everyone just wanted the PS2 and everyone was copying games and no one was buying them, but 1,000 other reasons. But what's funny is Xbox and GameCube each got a little bit of the Dreamcast magic to them. And I would, to be a little bit of a smartass for a moment, I would call Sega a AAA company because I can categorize most of their output under any one of 3 A's. Ambition, attitude, arcade.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because they were, if nothing, an ambitious company. They made wild ideas, big swings, and they moved technology and game design forward sometimes, and other times, and maybe sometimes we catch up 20 years later, who knows? And the Xbox got a lot of the ambition and the attitude when they first came out with games like Shenmue 2 and Jet Set Radio Future.
Yep.
Whereas Nintendo got Super Monkey Ball.
Yeah.
They got arcade. They got that through the toy lens. And true, later we got Sonic Adventure 2 Battle and then Sonic Adventure DX, Ikaruga, which was a Japanese-only Dreamcast title at the time, but a little more of that, like, again, the small disc, the very play-forward designed controller, that pick-up-and-play arcade ideal comes through in what the GameCube is. And I love what Nintendo has done since, but I feel like the last time we got that sort of just fun, toy, arcade machine, everything like that, it was the GameCube. It was a very nice coming together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Wii carried some of that over. You know, you think about Wii Sports and that stuff, like definitely an arcade mentality, more of a family-friendly mentality.
Yeah.
The GameCube, I think, is the last time until the Nintendo Switch where I felt like Nintendo always had a gimmick, but the GameCube, mostly the gimmick was the mini disc. For the most part, it was just a console. Then the Wii and the Wii U were both very gimmick-heavy, for better or worse. Yep. And the Switch also is technically a gimmick, the portable incorporation to the console, but like the motion controls are played down but available. Like it feels like a return to the GameCube's mentality. And also library wise, I'd say the Switch is the first time where I feel like we have a diverse library of both first and third party games. And the GameCube was the last time we had that because the Wii and the Wii U were impossible to develop for, especially powerful third-party titles. Like, even though I'm not a huge fan of the series, things like Call of Duty, like, wouldn't run on those consoles, but not run well. You know, I think about how Mass Effect 3 came out on the Wii U, and it runs. Geoff has it. It plays fine, but
it does.
It's not the Xbox version for sure, you know, like the 360 version. And, like, I feel like the GameCube was the first time we were almost competing with the console generation, even though graphically it wasn't the same.
Yeah. There's a lot of simultaneous releases.
Right.
You get a lot of PS5, Xbox now, but back in the early 2000s, it was PS2, GameCube, Xbox, and you could really, dare to compare on it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just really interesting to see like where Nintendo has gone as far as like innovation in game design. Like you could argue that something like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was a game-changing game. I would tend to agree with that. But like game changing in scope, scale, emergent gameplay. But it's not weird as shit like Nintendo used to be. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the weirdest thing that we get is a 1-2 switch, or we get WarioWare Get It Together. Like I really miss the old GameCube. Like we're gonna just throw shit at the wall. It's gonna be weird, and maybe you'll hate it, but like we're gonna do it anyway. We got a little bit of that on the Wii U with like stuff like Captain Toad we got, which like that shouldn't have been a title, but I'm so glad it is. But that I really miss that era of games where it was just like, and we get some of that in indie, but I'd really love to see a return to like Nintendo's roots of like just doing weird shit, doing more real deal baseballs. Like that's what I want from Nintendo. Like put out your big marquee titles, yes, Tears of the Kingdom, yes, woo, yay. But I just want to see like 3 or 4 weird games a year.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, think about Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles is a game that could have only existed.
Hell yes.
Could have only existed on the GameCube. And now we do have a re-release, I believe, on Switch that is, I've heard is fine. But like that original, or, Zelda Four Swords, like all those multiplayer games that incorporated the Game Boy Advance, one of my favorite video game consoles of all time. Like, that was also like the peripherals and the third-party support and we talked about the microphone on the panel, all of these things that they tried. All of this was a precursor to the Wii and the Wiimote, right? A lot of that stuff got incorporated into the Wiimote and what the Wiimote could do. Look, I loved being able to play Zelda Four Swords and see the map on my screen while we were running around and lighting each other on fire, because that's all you ever did in that game. Like
getting to hidden vote who was helpful and who was terrible.
Yeah.
Not slowing down gameplay because you went down into like a little dungeon area. You checked that on your screen. Honestly, I loved so much of the design of Zelda Four Swords. The summer of 2004, I played so much of that game with friends.
Yeah. And I think also we would have never gotten a game like Luigi's Mansion on a modern console. Like we have now. We have the third one on the Switch, but that was the launch. Well, Luigi game that wasn't a platformer was the launch title of the GameCube. We just don't get that anymore. I mean, the Wii launch title was Wii Sports and then Twilight Princess, which came out simultaneously on the GameCube. But the Switch was Breath of the Wild, which is, I think, a safe bet for a launch title. It was different for them, but it was also doing stuff that other games had done something like for years, whereas nobody had done anything like Luigi's Mansion at the time. This was before we got the Ghostbusters game. We wouldn't get that for many years later. I agree, Jacob. I think that the experimentation, look, we got Star Fox Adventures on that console, and love or hate it, they took a dinosaur-based game that had nothing to do with Star Fox and were Rare, I think it was a Rare game. Rare was how do we make this more sellable? Well, why don't we put Star Fox in it, right? And it's interesting, and some of that narrative is carried over. Crystal is a regular character in the later games. Double Dash, again, experimentation. I just think you're right. There was so much more of that on the system when we got initial series and now ongoing series. Wasn't Strikers the first time on GameCube, I believe?
Yep. Yes.
And Baseball
also.
Yeah, a lot of Mario Sports. It almost felt like after a point they went, what games has Mario not played yet? Fuck it, put it on the GameCube.
And I think part of that was the desperation to get people to play the system too, for sure. But there were also tons of games I didn't play back then that I'm only playing for the first time now, and some I still haven't played. I've gone at length, especially if you're a patron, on Metroid Prime Remastered and how it's one of the greatest Metroid games ever. But at the time, I went, nah, it's first person. That's dumb. Shooters are dumb. I'm only going to play Fusion, which is still my favorite. And now, of course, I'm eating those words. And I still haven't played Wind Waker because same mentality. Oh, it's cartoony. That's dumb. Twilight Princess was so gritty. I'm not going to play this stupid cartoon game for babies. And I was wrong. Very wrong. And I haven't even played the game yet. And so I think that all of that experimentation was across the board in a way that I feel like PlayStation 2 and Xbox didn't necessarily play it safe. Xbox was a brand new console, right? But PS2 at that time, we got RPGs, we got beat 'em ups, we got shooters. I'm sure there are plenty of weird, quirky games on those other consoles, but it did feel like GameCube, because Nintendo was a toy maker first, led with a lot of those bizarre, interesting things. I mean, again, people are clamoring for Chibi Robo. There are dozens of us, and they're never going to re-release that. I'm secretly hoping that NSO releases a GameCube library next. I know we're getting towards the end of the Switch's life cycle. We don't know what a next Switch will look like, but I want the GameCube on something else, because you can't play most of this stuff anywhere else. Where's my Wind Waker remaster HD port?
It's on the Wii U.
But it's the only one left. Bring it over. Come on, we're all here.
Do I need to bang the video game preservation drum now? I feel like this is where I do this.
Please, I will join in.
Okay, great. So Nintendo needs to do a better job at making their games accessible to folks outside of their original console. I think Xbox has done an admirable job. PlayStation is kind of catching up. They bought Gaikai and they're trying to get, especially some of their PS3 games that are developed on the cell processor, which is notoriously difficult to get on any other console from a BC perspective.
Yeah, it's a black box.
It's a black box because, let me tell you about the cell processor and how revolutionary it's going to be. But Nintendo's got these
supercomputers.
They've got these games that are just locked on consoles. GameCube, I think, is the one that where it's locked the most, because Game Boy Advance now you can kind of do on NSO. They killed the DS and DSiWare and 3DS, but we just need a better way to play these games. And I don't know what the solution is, because I don't think Nintendo cares about that kind of stuff at all. They're buy our new thing. You don't need the old thing. The old thing is old. The new thing is good. Buy that.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been relegated to buying collections, and the collection stuff started on the Nintendo. I mentioned the Sonic Mega Collection and stuff, and I believe the first Mega Man X and Mega Man collections were also on the GameCube.
They were on that generation. I think that was the simultaneous release, yeah.
And we've gotten a lot of those re-releases, and we just got the Mega Man Battle Network series on multiple platforms, but it shouldn't just fall on the original IP holders. And again, we got the Mario 3D All-Stars collection, but it was literally straight up ports. Most of them control not great because they weren't optimized for the Switch. And then you get something like a Metroid Prime Remaster, which new control scheme, colorblind mode, they go above and beyond. It's just so inconsistent. The Wii U's Virtual Console was the closest thing we ever got to that kind of preservation, especially for Nintendo titles, and then they killed it all. I appreciate that now those libraries are attached to an online service because at least you don't have to pay per game anymore. We're not repurchasing every single game. We're only repurchasing
every console generation, having to do it again.
Right. And so that's frustrating, but it's a step in the right direction. I'm hoping that as the Switch continues and we get a Switch 2 or Switch Pro or whatever's next, that all that stuff just carries over, because every generation is a different, besides Wii to Wii U, every generation has been a different doohickey. And I think that's the biggest problem. And to bring it back to the GameCube, I think the biggest issue with the mini disc was that it was a mini disc. I remember being so excited that my PS2 could play CDs and DVDs. I mean, most people had a PS2 to play DVDs. You didn't buy it as a video game console. You bought it because it was whatever it was, $200 DVD player.
It was cheaper than most conventional DVDs at the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But the GameCube was GameCube, I'm going to be able to put discs in a Nintendo system. Why are they so small?
Yeah.
What's going on? And then the block system, goddamn memory cards, not knowing how many blocks a game was, and then the standard GameCube memory cards only having 30 blocks or some nonsense, some small amount, and third-party ones had twice as much, but they corrupted often. It was just, it was the best and worst that peripherals and memory cards were ever at that time, especially on the GameCube.
Oh, at that time, yes, because if you want to talk, we can get into the Vita if you want. You want to talk about overly expensive proprietary memory that had no business costing that much? It was a fucking SD card.
Yeah.
It wasn't even differently shaped.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm grateful of with the Switch and the Steam Deck, at least, is they both use freaking SD
Thank
cards.
God.
Just standard stuff. But
can never be perfect, ups and downs.
Yeah. We touched on it a little bit. I love that the GameCube also had junk doohickeys. We got the Wavebird, which is still one of the best controllers of all time, but it also had a microphone for Mario Party. It had...
And Hey You Pikachu.
And Odama.
And Odama.
Hey You Pikachu was N64.
Right, yes.
Pokemon Channel, that's the one.
Pokemon Channel. But
and,
also...
Yeah, Odama. Oh my God. Have you played Odama?
I have. I own Odama, and I've played Odama. That's an interesting game. It's not great. It's fine, but it's innovative and fun. And again, I want those swings, and I'll support those swings.
Yes. My household is a pinball house.
Okay.
My spouse loves pinball. I really like it. She loves it. And I love weird, wacky titles. And so picking this up, and we usually for anniversaries and for big whatever milestones, we're like, what are you doing for that? We're playing a video game. We're going to pick a new one and play it. We did Odama for some wedding anniversary. And I tell you, I don't think we're ever going to touch it again, but that was a hell of a day.
And then obviously the connection to the Game Boy Advance too, that whole link cable, Game Boy player situation, so you could play them on your TV, but also you could get the connectivity. We've talked about Four Swords, we've talked about Crystal Chronicles, but some games had the functionality of, if you had your Game Boy Advance, you got some extra, fun doohickey, which the Chow Garden, you could take it on your Game Boy Advance for Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. You could do the
You were able to play the original Metroid if you had Prime and Fusion.
Yep, and I believe you could even, and keep me honest here, could you even connect the e-reader for a couple titles and do things with the Game Boy Advance, or is that too many peripherals? Are we past our peripheral max?
My instinct says that's too many, but I could be wrong. I've never had an e-reader, but I do want to take a moment and talk about how inextricably linked, culturally speaking, the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube are.
Yeah.
The fact that they were both in Japan and America released within 6 months of each other. And both of them were the first times where there wasn't a Mario title or a new Mario title, because Game Boy Advance started with Super Mario Advance, the re-release of Super Mario Bros. 2 USA, putting in the voice clips from Charles Martinet, why not? And then you had Luigi's Mansion. So it was a little bit of oddballs there. as well as, you got a lot of not quite simultaneous releases, but it really was the last time you had that feeling of back in the NES era. You get the NES release and the Game Boy release. You get the GameCube release and the Game Boy Advance release. The link cable made it a controller. I would argue that that's kind of going back to Sega, and sometimes you come back to an idea 20 years later. This was the germination of the Switch.
Yeah.
Because you have this, and then its next stage was the Wii U, where it gave you a big Game Boy Advance as your main controller, and it was only inextricably for that. And then the Switch just became that big controller. Was that the idea? Not back in 1999 when they're making this shit, but it definitely is a lineage that, with the benefit of hindsight, you can look back and you can see. And GameCube being a Nintendo console, this is the time when they were like, the Game Boy Advance is doing so great. Do they really need to be making home consoles anymore? But it was Nintendo, and it could do something that a lot of other consoles couldn't. It could survive a cultural slow burn.
Yeah.
Other consoles and names have come around, but GameCube was able to survive releasing games and being itself until the Wii was ready.
Yeah.
Again, as opposed to something like the Vita, where Sony just went, well, that's a bad idea.
Yeah, also, you think about, not a lot of people think of the GameCube as the first online console. For a lot of people, that's the Xbox. But for me, it was the GameCube. I had the broadband adapter. I had Phantasy Star Online.
Yeah.
I never owned that horrible, gigantic keyboard controller. Have you seen the controller with the keyboard in the middle?
Yeah.
But I played so much Phantasy Star Online, both offline with friends and online. And then eventually, I never got an Xbox, but I got a 360, and that's when I really started playing online more. But my earliest memories of playing online was Phantasy Star Online, and was it a good online system? No. Has Nintendo notoriously continued to be bad at doing things online? Yes. But it was the first time I experienced playing with other people on the internet. And I was like, you can do this? This is a thing you can do?
On a console.
And now it's ubiquitous, right? Everyone has to have online of some kind. Nintendo still continues to put too many hoops to jump through to do it well, but they did kind of start that, because I know the PS2 had a broadband thing, and of course Xbox Live debuted on the original Xbox, but I feel like the broadband adapter came first. It may not have, but it was definitely all around that time. And it's just
pretty early.
And it's just fascinating to look at that time of now online functionality for literally all of gaming is ubiquitous. We have games that are only online, like Diablo 4 supposedly, which is going to be only online, which is, But back then, it was still so experimental, and Nintendo tried to get into it and ahead of it. Of course, they didn't, but they did throw their hat in the ring pretty early, and I think that's something worth acknowledging.
Yeah.
Well, that was also sort of the evolution of the Satellaview and things like that, so it's an interesting convergence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Y'all didn't play Mario Kart Double Dash with 8 networked GameCubes. Just think of the amount of money you'd have to spend in order to play GameCube over even 4 consoles. You need 4 consoles, 4 broadband adapters, 4 copies of Mario Kart Double Dash, many controllers. It was a novelty that I'm sure not many of us had experienced, but I appreciate that it's out there.
But don't you want to have fun?
I do, but I'm also not rich.
We go to MagFest or PAX or something like that. Someone set that up. And if not, and my axe, I'll bring the GameCube. It's got a handle on it.
Yeah,
and it is built like a goddamn tank. Look,
Yeah.
it does 1d6 damage. It is a full-on martial weapon.
Yeah.
And I love it for that. Mm-hmm. And that's also part of its identity, that sort of built tough toy that is also electronics, that is also all of those things. And it made it easier to go places. One of the memories shared was from Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog, talked about one of his formative memories for the GameCube was bringing it to school because his mom was a teacher and would, work in the school during the summer. So he and his brother would have to go in while she was at work, and they would just plug the GameCube into one of the rolling cart TVs and just play 007 Nightfire all day.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I remember bringing consoles back and forth to friends' houses. The GameCube traveled easiest.
So easy. It had a handle, damn it. That reminds me, we haven't talked about that bizarre press event that we only have photo relics of now, but so many people of note holding the GameCube like it's a purse almost, or a handbag. And it's just so interesting. Whereas the Switch is infinitely more travelable now for most people, and even the Steam Deck.
But it doesn't have its own handle.
It doesn't have its own handle. It's it's just very interesting, that design, right? I remember getting the GameCube and I was like, oh, a handle. Well, why does it have a handle? And then when the first time I brought it to a friend's house, it's oh, okay, I understand now, right? It's just very interesting that design existed, and no other console ever attempted that nor did Nintendo afterwards.
The weakest part of the system that you had to protect with your life was the joysticks on the controller.
Yeah, let's talk about the controllers because we haven't gone there yet.
Please.
What a fun controller. That A button is enormous. I appreciate it. Those little jelly bean buttons for the X and the Y, love it. And even though I have mixed feelings about the L and R triggers, that you could depress them and then click them in, like to kind of...
I was fascinated by those.
Fascinating. Tons of fascinating stuff. The C stick, what's that? They're like C buttons, but it's a stick. So many things to talk about. The D-pad and the C stick kind of sat on these little insets. If you flipped it over, it had little like circles that almost look like Mickey Mouse ears. I always put my initials on those whenever I like brought them to friends' houses to be like, don't take my controller, this my controller.
I would usually bring my weirdest colored one whenever I went somewhere. That was usually how I saved it. But yeah, there you go.
I mean, it was an interesting look at dual analog before we really had dual analog, and also
like standardize it,
right. And also it was a comfortable controller. I mean, I'm still one of those sickos who liked the N64 controller. It's a bad controller, but I liked it.
Those are different things.
Yeah.
Those are different things. But the GameCube controller is to this day considered one of the most comfortable video game controllers ever made, so much so that when the Wii and Wii U came out, they needed GameCube ports, and then the Switch needed an adapter so you could play Smash Brothers Ultimate with a GameCube controller, which I don't think was available at launch. It was available shortly after. Like, it became the definitive way to play Smash Brothers. You know, that series debuted on the N64, but it became kind of ubiquitous with the GameCube, and for sure the controller was. I mean, it was my favorite way to play. I've gotten used to playing Smash Brothers with the
Pro controller, same.
With the Pro controller,
yeah,
but it doesn't feel quite right. The GameCube controller still feels better, and I think it's just because also Melee is the one I spent the most time playing, that and Brawl, and they both I was able to play with the GameCube controllers. The sickos who played with the sideways Wiimote, I don't know what you're on. Like that, I could never get behind that.
I had something to prove.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, I know.
What I had to prove was I'm not very good at Smash Brothers.
The only games I ever played on the sideways Wiimote were like anything made by WayForward back on the Wii.
Yeah.
They had some great like side-scrolling beat-em-ups like Batman and the Brave, and I could go on and on. But yeah, that's the only way I would play Wiimote sideways games. That is, no offense for sickos.
Yes.
No, absolutely. I'm a sicko, and I know this. Yeah, absolutely. But something also great about the controller, the GameCube controller, was while the GameCube was still part of the simultaneous releases with PS2 and Xbox, PS2 and Xbox were going down the course of parallel evolution. And so you had the 4-button mimicking the D-pad setup and everything else. And I love Nintendo. I grew up with an NES, like I said, but I am a PlayStation kid in my bones. I have a more tempered view of games nowadays, but like PlayStation, oh my God. And so I know where all those buttons are. You show me button prompts. I could like spin me around 3 times, give me the thing. I got it. I blame Parappa the Rappa for that.
Right.
Blame,
Sure.
I don't know, but I credit it.
Yeah.
The GameCube controller, you know every button by feel.
Yeah. You can slide your thumb along it and find it.
Absolutely. And it's not a thing of, well, the X and Y are the same shape, but they're oriented differently, and they are not perfectly circular. You know where they are. And so, as somebody who still to this day will mix up where X, Y, and A and B are on an Xbox versus a Nintendo controller, I'm a little more comfortable on Nintendo, but I still will play on Xbox controllers just enough for it to be really frustrating to me to have something where, it's that easy and that accessible, as well as the fact that it is a damned good acknowledgement that you usually only have one button to rule them all in your game.
Right.
And look, people can have and will continue to use every button you give them on a controller. That's just what it is. But you typically are going to be running one of them into the ground. And you can kind of classify and move with things. There's the acknowledgement and the denial, which is what the circle and X buttons are meant to be on the PlayStation in its original design. Yes and no. I look at the 4 equally tempered buttons of input on the right side of the controller as something of, hey guys, do whatever you want, have fun with it, we'll figure it out. Whereas the GameCube controller is, this is the controller. It's going to be fun. Well, what do we do with it? We've made it pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that way it's like, you play a new game or you switch games on any other controller and you will probably have a, what is yes? What is the menu? What is the whatever? And over the years and over generations and as series have gone on, you get a decent feel for it. You play an RPG. If it's not the top button or the start button, it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's got to be the top button, not the big button or something like that. And so it's asymmetrical, which feels like it should be a problem, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's the exception.
Well, yeah,
I don't know how you felt, but that little BB button, I felt like there was always consequences to pressing it because it was so
Yes.
small
Yeah.
and it was red and like
It was
if you're
cancel.
pressing it, it's cancel.
yeah.
You press it, you're canceled.
Or it's the big bomb, or it's like you almost need like the jet engine, flip up the switch so you can hit
Yep.
the button.
Yep, Steel Battalion style. Let's go.
Ooh, yeah.
But
Steel Battalion on the GameCube. No. Yes.
I do wonder though if controllers followed the GameCube, what it would be like for new players now. Because like my favorite example is like my spouse, who does play quite a few games now, had to like kind of learn from scratch how to use analog sticks because no game now tells you. All games assume you know basic movement on some level. They'll maybe make you look around, but like if you've never used dual analog, it's not inherent that one is to move and one is to look. It is to us because it's been over generations. But if more controllers were like the GameCube, where the buttons were different sizes and the analog sticks were in different places and the D-pad was in a different place, like I feel like it has a more natural flow to it that would be easier for new players, which has always been Nintendo's main priority, is for children and new players, right? That's what they lean towards. Doesn't mean they don't do stuff that's not for them, but it's definitely their focus and always has been their focus as a company. And I think that the GameCube controller, while it didn't like revolutionize controller style, unfortunately the PlayStation is what revolutionized controller style. Is pretty much everything looks like, you know, the PlayStation and the Xbox controllers are now
Convergent evolution.
yeah, they're just kind of locked in. I happen to like the PS5 controller. Not everybody does like the kind of almost boomerangy controller, but I have giant hands, so the longer the bottoms of a controller is, the better. It's why I have the Hori like attachment controllers for the Switch because like I have big hands. But it's one of those things that I think the GameCube will always be one of the defining controller styles because it feels accessible. Like also think about the N64 controller, right? Like it was weird as hell, but because of that it stood out and it was also pretty accessible once you knew how N64 games worked, right? It made the analog stick approachable because it was in the center. It's how you had to hold the controller sort of.
I always wanted a third hand for the N64.
Right.
Though.
I know, right?
Like I just want a third hand for that controller, so it's not made for me, it's made for aliens.
Right.
Yes. The first time I played Paper Mario, Sarah was showing it to me, and we absolutely did 2 players, 1 controller on it. Still wasn't 3 hands on the controller, but it was just... She wanted me to play the game, but she has this pathological difficulty with watching someone else play games, so she needed to participate. And it ended up being a really fun and adorable thing. But I think, too, by the same token, the Wii motion controls was a little too far on a shoehorning on things, where it allowed for some great stuff. I remember being so excited about the Wiimote. You know, it makes its own light gun games. Incredible. The tracking on it leaves something to be desired, but it was super cool. But it was a little too limited, a little too much of a shoehorn. Whereas something like the N64 controller, the GameCube controller, you can argue standardization or something a little more normal is a little easier to get into for developers and gamers, but the distinction is enough while still having all of the facets and pieces that you need that you can quickly adapt. I feel one can quickly adapt both on the development and on the gamer side, and I think that is to its credit and contributed well to its identity.
Yeah. I mean, I think the GameCube overall is a console best known for its first-party successes and failures, as well as its third-party successes. Because again, I think it had the largest third-party library of any Nintendo console, the Switch excluded, because the Switch now
the NES and the Switch excluded.
Right. But like, I think what's fascinating also about it as a console is like, people don't just kind of like the GameCube. People either have no experience or dislike it, or love this console, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, right? Nintendo's always lent to fanaticism. I speak as a fanatic about it, right? Like I'm a Nintendo fanboy. But I think it's very funny that the GameCube specifically, beyond other consoles that I've talked about, the people who had a GameCube, like I don't want to call them console warriors because that is a derogatory term and it's meant to be. But like they definitely championed their console. They loved this console in a way that I think, you know, the Wii was more of, it was in every living room. It was cheap. Families played it.
It was great. It helped Nintendo out greatly, and I love a lot of what Nintendo's come out with since. So, you know, salutes the Wii.
Right. But the GameCube was one of those you had to like almost defend why you chose it, because like PlayStation and Xbox had more of the teen to adult games, whereas it was a kiddie console, which it wasn't, but
Yeah, the kiddie wonderland that was Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. I know I keep coming back to it, but I love that game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I want it back.
There's never been a game up until that or since like that game, right? It's why when you ask about I think several people who replied to our messages mentioned Eternal Darkness, because it's just one of those games that doesn't exist anywhere anymore and is unlike anything else. And we were supposed to get a sequel, but it never happened. Like, it was in production, and I think the studio got shut down, or
Silicon Knights is actually like down the road, or used to be down the road from where I am. So I'm in London, Ontario, and they used to be based in Kitchener, Ontario, which for non-Canadians, you're like, what is he saying? But it was basically maybe an hour from Toronto. They made some great games beyond Eternal Darkness.
Oh, yeah.
Too Human.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They also worked on Twin Snakes. Yeah.
And then got caught up in an Unreal epic lawsuit that ended up like folding the company. That's a fun read. We're not going to talk about it here, but that's a fun read if you're interested. On the console point, I was spoiled. So I had all 3 consoles eventually. I didn't get them all like at the same time.
Of course.
But all of my friends in high school, like when I was in grade 7, grade 8, like we used to do Halo LAN parties, and I was like, I need the Halo to practice because my friends are so much better than me. So I ended up getting an Xbox like maybe 2 years after the GameCube, and then I got a PlayStation 2 right near the end of the console's life, and traded in a lot of, to your point, Geoff, I traded in a bunch of NES and Super NES games because I just didn't have the money to have all 3 consoles. So I'm like, let's trade a bunch of these rare games to GameStop, and they'll give me a PlayStation 2, and they did, and I regret it.
Oh, yeah.
Even though I had all 3, and I had a breadth of games in that generation beyond maybe Halo and Xbox, I look back with the most fondness towards my GameCube and the experiences I had, with my brother, with my friends. We used to do tournaments at my house, and like half the games on the schedule were always weird Nintendo games, or like WarioWare Mega Party Mix, a weird mini game in that one, because Nintendo's weird, and I just want to return to weird. Is that too much to ask?
No,
it's not.
I love weird. And also, far as local multiplayer, a little outside of the Nintendo first party, the weird, but a kind of a comparison between consoles. When X-Men Legends 2 came out, I remember playing that a bunch on the PS2 in my friend Greg's dorm room. And we played that a bunch and everything else, but it was a 2-player game on the PS2. When I got it for myself, I got it on the GameCube, and by God, we played through that game. Greg and I did, and other friends, and just folks were able to like pop in and out as all of that. And you just don't take Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler's mine, and off we go. And it was so great to just have that kind of, I don't know, arcade top-down dungeon crawler, but also X-Men. I was so excited about Marvel Ultimate Alliance, but the magic was gone for me. But X-Men Legends 2 on the GameCube holds such strong good memories for me, for that kind of just, everyone get in the room, we're stopping apocalypse.
I mean, that's another franchise that started with X-Men Legends, then became Marvel Ultimate Alliance. We just got one on the Switch. That was pretty good. But the thing I think about the multiplayer side of GameCube is that, yes, the Xbox, you could also have 4 controllers, and, there was a lot of fun multiplayer shooters.
But it felt more online forward.
Right. And whereas the GameCube was very much the last bastion of local multiplayer, I think the Wii is truly the last bastion of local multiplayer. But like the GameCube felt like just an evolution of the N64's multiplayer, right? It had 4 ports on the front of the console. It was designed to be 4-player. The PlayStation wouldn't get that until it went wireless with the PS3. PS1 and PS2 needed a multi-tap. And like, I just love that GameCube was always very much about party play and fun, and like the 4 ports on the front of the GameCube symbolizes that, and it made it so easy for either your friends to bring over controllers or for you to buy 4 controllers yourself. And all of the games had multiplayer in a world where now I think there's a lot more single player focused stuff, and if there's multiplayer on a single player game, it's kind of shoehorned in.
Or if it's multiplayer, it's online only. Like local multiplayer is almost a luxury.
Yeah.
Even in multiplayer games.
And the GameCube era was definitely a time where it was definitely local co-op first, right? Like Smash Brothers, Mario Kart, all the sports games, X-Men Legends, all of them were designed with people being in a room together in mind, Crystal Chronicles, all of that stuff.
While we're sitting here being like, they just don't make the game boxes like they used to, kids. Something interesting with, that the GameCube kind of was the last, feels like the last console that really did go hard on the funky peripherals. We mentioned it earlier, but I think, again, the Wii Motion Control and Guitar Hero kind of killed that. It wasn't Nintendo's fault. Sort of Nintendo's fault. But it became that thing of, I don't need all of these plastic things in my house. I feel silly for still having 2 Donkey Kongas in my house.
I've got 4 because I'm an idiot.
No, you're a winner and you commit. Those 2 bongos just ended up in my home. And it's sad because we tried playing it, but nowadays the input lag on an HD TV, I could put it on as game mode as I want, but you're also not pushing buttons. You're kind of slamming on it and clapping at it. And look, I am a rhythm game fiend. I am a trained musician. I can adjust to what the tempo and the anticipation of beats you want me to. That's a bridge too far. There's just a little too much of it. I'm like, this is not the fun it's supposed to be.
Yeah. I mean, we even got a DDR game that was exclusive for the GameCube, the Mario Mix, which had Mario tracks on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just give me dumb peripherals. And look, I know that we're going to sound 1,000 years old being like, games aren't like they used to be. But I just think a lot of the innovation and the wild craziness that I seek now is in indie. And I'm sure there's a lot of indie developers out there. And I'm sure Matt and Geoff, you've spoken to some of them on this very program. Subscribe to the Patreon and you can hear all of them. There's your plug.
Thank you.
But I'm sure a lot of them go back to those days of the N64 and the GameCube and being like, I made this game because I adored this weird game that I played on the GameCube. So it lives on in indie, but, there's great games on the Switch. I don't want to discount that, video games are great.
Yes.
They're just less weird than they used to be. But we can find the weird if you can find the weird if you look for it.
Yeah. I feel like what we're talking about here is, yes, can come off and is a little bit rooted in us, get off my damn lawn, kids.
Yeah.
But it's also the fact of, the GameCube engenders this level of sometimes even fanaticism and love. And why is that? Why does it have such a strong identity? And what is the source of it? And so it's a bit of that, we don't have these anymore. We don't have all these funky peripherals. My New York City apartment appreciates that. It misses it, but it appreciates that. All these weird and wild games, indie games happen now. And there's ups and there's downs and they end up in new places. But this was an interesting convergence of so many things. And the GameCube was able to not perfect, but iterate on stuff that people didn't necessarily get on the N64. Paper Mario was a very late release on the N64. Fantastic game. Paper Mario, The 1,000-Year Door, goddamned impeccable.
Yeah. One of the best RPGs ever made.
Oh, it's so freaking good.
So I have regrets, and I own 2 copies of Paper Mario and the 1,000-Year Door, and I've not ever played it. So I guess I need to, and I tried to, because I own 2 copies, I backed them up and tried to play them on my Steam Deck, but for some reason I couldn't get the emulation to work out. So with that, I need to ask you both, is there a game that you regret not playing that even in your adult years you've not gone back to, that this podcast will now prompt you to go back and play from the GameCube library?
Oh, I mean, I've admitted some already. Until very recently, it was Metroid Prime, but it is currently The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker. And I could emulate it, but I tried emulating it, and don't steal games. The Dolphin is great. It does great emulation, but there's just something about not playing it on a Nintendo console that just doesn't feel right. I replayed Metroid Fusion on emulation to prepare for Dread, but then when it came out on the NSO and I could play it on the Switch, I replayed it again and it felt better. I couldn't tell you why. There's no difference. But Wind Waker is one of those that doesn't feel right on emulation. I don't have a GameCube, and they haven't re-released the HD version from the Wii U. I keep hoping they will, because I really want to play it, and after the remaster of Prime, I'm more stalwart in my resolve. I really think it'll be great on the Switch if I can wait for it. But that's probably one of the biggest ones. I mean, and I will also say, just to throw it in, my game that there's never been another game like it, and it's my greatest regret that I didn't keep it, because I really want to play it and there's no way to play anything like it, is Kirby's Air Ride. One of the best Kirby games ever made that I played endlessly, and there's never been, they have rehashed so much on the Switch, all of the mini games, and yet we never got another Kirby's Air Ride. It just doesn't make sense. The new one that they did, Dream Buffet, I hear is great and fun. I haven't played it yet, but there's something about Kirby's Air Ride that's so specific that I'm I really wish that this would get re-released, remade, get a new one, whatever. What about you, Geoff? Do you have a game that you never played on the GameCube that you still haven't played but really want to?
Oh, I got a couple of them.
Yeah.
I realized that I have never played Killer 7.
Oh,
I really want to. It's Suda 51. You want to talk about weird ideas that take big swings? Let's go.
Yeah,
and
Suda is the king.
Let's go Ichi.
Yeah.
As well, and speaking of Capcom 5, I've never played PN03, and I'd love to give it a try.
Yeah.
That's definitely one that I always keep my eye out. And as much of an RPG fan as I am, I slept on so many RPGs on the GameCube.
Yep.
Thinking of the Dreamcast lineage. Frankie's going to kill me. I've never played Skies of Arcadia.
Oh, that's a big one. I never played Tales of Symphonia, and apparently the Switch port is bad. So I'm going to wait and play
I'm going to have to go back. Yeah. I didn't do
play.
Tales of Symphonia. I got a copy of Batten Kaitos because of Red Valentine's side quest episode.
Yeah.
And I've yet to crack it open, but I'm very happy that it's there. It can be a little difficult sometimes to go, I'm going to sit down and play the RPGs.
Yeah.
But those 3 lines in particular, Batten Kaitos, Tales of Symphonia, and Skies of Arcadia, I got to go back. I got to play them. I feel sad. I feel bad.
I'm like that with Fire Emblem, like Path of Radiance.
Oh, yeah, I never played
need
that
to,
either.
like,
Yep.
I need to play it. That's Ike's game.
Yep.
But I also would like to have that $250 for something else.
I think I own a copy. I'll have to get back to you because my brother and I a few years ago, like we just took some of our games and said like, let's consolidate down because, you know, my parents are going to move into a smaller place at one point and our days of having just our old school game collection on display in my parents' house are numbered. So like, let's just pare down a little bit. Maybe we can buy a couch with some of these games. And I think I sold some of my rare games and I don't remember which ones.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is on Twitter, I'll let y'all know next time I go home because now I'm curious.
Yeah.
Did I sell Cube of War? Did I sell Fire Emblem Path of Radiance? I really hope I didn't, but I can't say with certainty that I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, another game in this vein, Jacob, is Chibi Robo, a game that I've heard
Yeah.
endlessly about. I've
Yeah,
watched
never
so
played.
many YouTube videos on, and I heard is fantastic. I've never played. Like, I think there were a lot of key Nintendo games here and third-party games that just only exist here. I never played Cell Damage. We talked about it. I think I remember watching videos on it, but it was also a very weird and wacky launch title that a lot of folks loved. I think it's very easy to look back on the GameCube because there were so many games on this console that were only on this console that it's easy to have missed a bunch of them. But yeah, the Fire Emblem, I mean, my first Fire Emblem was Three Houses, which I loved.
Yeah.
And so like Batten Kaitos, I feel like I rented, but I definitely didn't play, right? I'm very excited for that re-release that they're putting out on the Switch because I can finally actually spend time with it. But like, yeah, I think that this console just had so many unique titles that some have been re-released. Like I said, I do have Tales of Symphonia on Steam, so I'll probably play it on the Steam Deck at some point. But like, there are also so many of these that are just locked here. I mean, Alien Hominid, which I have played endlessly, was mostly...
To me, that was a GameCube game.
Right. It was a GameCube game. Yeah. There's a bunch. Were there any for you, Jacob, besides Fire Emblem?
Besides Fire Emblem and Paper Mario, no.
Okay.
Cell Damage was re-released
Yeah.
in HD, but I haven't touched that re-release. That is like the perfect 6 out of 10 game.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a great game, but it's one that's fun that I'd love to revisit and just say like, yes, I touched that. It is still a 6 out of 10 video game. Thank you.
Sometimes that's what you want.
I've talked a lot of smack about Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg, just in that like, man, what an amazing game from the Sonic team. But I can't remember if it's actually a good game or not.
Yeah.
So that's another one that I'd love to just revisit in my old age.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And we're definitely talking up either the infamous failures or the big successes and things, and some of the other games that I feel it's a good time to kind of give a little bit of the rundown that we got from Twitter and from Discord as well that I haven't already mentioned. I mentioned Morgan Shaver from Shack News talking about the tiny discs, but they mentioned Casper Spirit Dimensions as those games that you grow up with and they're weird, but you have a lot of love for them. Mitch Pampayek from Geek Elite Media shares my love of Eternal Darkness and also Def Jam Vendetta, a whole area of things that I never got into.
They're excellent. They were Aki wrestling fighting games, and so they had that lineage of like the good WWF games and the WCW games, and then even Ultimate Muscle, which I named, is an Aki game, and why I'm excited for the AEW video game that's coming out because like that is classic that era wrestling game, so I'm excited for it. But yeah, Def Jam Vendetta and Def Jam Fight for New York are just like absolute top tier classics.
So I'm a damn fool sleeping on this, and this is what we've got. Yeah, there we go.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. That's fine. This is important. This is why I'm bringing these things up. This is why we're talking about it. Hunter Bond from Berserk Studios was talking about Super Monkey Ball. I loved on the panel. It was like you were either Sonic Adventure 2 or you were Super Monkey Ball. Apparently, when you're tired of Smash, Super Monkey Ball is a real good arcade title to go for.
Monkey Target is amazing. So
there you go. And again, Pinball House. Puzzle games are balls or blocks. I love ball games. What can I say?
Sure. Don't we all?
Heyo. From our own network, from Jukebox Vertigo, Keith is talking about getting into kart racers just a little bit by getting to be a gunner in Double Dash. And yeah, Mario Kart should bring back a little more of the, you can have two people working as a partner on the kart. Because sometimes you just want to do one piece of it. And if that's a way to get a bunch of people on the couch playing the game together, that's what you should be doing. Justin Granfield shares that feeling of how jarring it was to see Sonic on a Nintendo console at first. But yeah, very quickly, it seemed like it was always meant to be there. And so there's a lot of games that you talk about who's got games, not games. GameCube's got plenty and all sorts of real good memories for it, too.
Yeah, it's one of those consoles. That's why, Jacob, I'm sure you did that panel, right? It genuinely drives conversation. It's one of those consoles that people always have something to say about, good, bad, and different. It's a conversation starter in a way that not all consoles are, right?
Yeah, because I was thinking of future PAXs for PAX West. Is there another console that we could bring that would have that same level of reverie? And I think I could only think of one. And I'd love to know, and this is probably a little bit self-indulgent, but I guess I'll self-allow it. If you were doing another one of these panels, is there a system that beyond the GameCube that you would be like, I know every person in the crowd is going to love this as much as I do? Because there's one that comes to mind for me.
I mean, for me, it's the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, no, that is the companion piece to this. You have the GameCube, you have the Game Boy Advance. We talked about their connection, and I think that's worth exploring.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we will. Wink.
Yeah, wink,
Heyo.
nudge.
Into it.
I think that this is the start of us doing some more console retrospectives, because I think beyond talking about controllers and specific games, specific franchises, I joke and seriously, don't be a console warrior. But the reason that those kinds of people exist is because when you have limited funds, limited time, you invest into a thing, and then that thing becomes the thing you do. And you feel obligated to defend that choice sometimes. And so, especially when the consoles were more competitive in a way that now they're in their own markets more so. I mean, Xbox is mostly software, Game Pass, all of that stuff. Sony is still making hardware that no one wants to play, like the PSVR 2. And Nintendo is in their own little fantasy land. I think that, and even Steam Deck now getting into the console wars a little bit. But there's no war anymore. But back in the day, we felt the need to defend it. And I think talking about consoles and looking back on their history is important to understanding why people are so fervently passionate for some of these consoles. I mean, there are definitely ones that I'm not as passionate about that I could talk about, like the PlayStation. One of Geoff's favorites, I got very late into its life cycle and played quite a bit, but I wasn't a first-person shooter person. So half the library was cut out for me because that was when it grew. I mean, not half, maybe a third. But
it was there.
There was a lot of shooters on that console, and it's kind of where it started with Doom and whatever else. I like this broader look at video game consoles because they are a huge part of video game history, right? We could also probably do retrospectives on arcade machines and, all that kind of stuff too, because I think those iterations are so important. I mean, remember when arcades were the best graphics out there?
Yeah.
We're not there anymore. That's long gone.
No, we're not. And if you wanted arcade graphics at home, you'd have to basically buy the board from Neo Geo for $500 or $200. But yeah, no, and I could probably talk at length about most handhelds. Game Boy Advance, I would also do a big old talk on the Nintendo DS because as popular as that was as well, wild ideas, integration of things, trying to force touchscreen stuff in the early days, sort of Nintendog saving it in a weird way.
Yeah.
I remember having some wild conversations with people about Nintendo DS versus PSP. And hindsight is a hell of a thing, people.
I just want to wear a shirt that says "Make Nintendo Weird Again."
Yeah.
So maybe someone can point me in that direction. Make Nintendo weird again.
Well, Jacob, thank you for joining us. This was a delightful conversation. I knew it would be. Before we wrap up the show, why don't you tell folks where they can find you and find all the cool stuff that you are doing? I know you can't quite talk about it yet, but you've got some exciting stuff coming soon. So why don't you tell folks where they can find you and all that cool stuff?
Yeah, so you can find me on the internet at Jacob McCourt on pretty much everything, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, etc. I host a couple of podcasts. Left Behind Game Club is one of them. Matt, you've been on it. You may be on it in the future very soon. It's a video game book club podcast. We are now just kind of whenever we feel like it, but we put out bangers, so check us out there. And then I host another show called Cutscenes. It's a video game, movie, and TV podcast that Matt is the narrator voice for.
It's true.
And So we just wrapped our Last of Us season, so we're on hiatus for now, but we're probably going to come back with a blockbuster summer style season where we watch movies like Rampage, Dwayne Johnson's Rampage, because, video games. You can find both of those on all major podcasting platforms, and thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Always happy to have you here.
As a patron, it's great to be here.
Thank you.
I know, right? Not the first time this has happened, and by golly. But yeah, we got some great input from folks about some of their favorite GameCube games, GameCube memories, but I know that's not everybody's, and I know there's plenty of folks out there that have games that they love to death and back that we didn't even mention. How dare we? Let us know what we missed. Let us know what games we should be playing, and just be a part of the conversation, because there's so many different ways to get in touch with us and let us know these things. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at FunandGamesPod. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. If you want to come at me personally, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Geoff Makes Noise, Geoff, Geoff. But you can let us know what you thought of this episode, previous episodes. What consoles would you like us to have retrospectives on? Who should we talk to in future episodes? What are the things you would like to hear us cover? Not what should we cover, but what would you like to hear us cover? Because we want to keep that going back and forth. You can also, if you'd like to support us in a different way, you can join our Patreon. We have some lovely patrons up on the high scoreboard, including Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Rob Bacon Golem Tremarco, Robert Proin, and Sean Bowen. Thank you so much, and please enter your initials up on the high scoreboard. Make sure to hold down the Z button when you do, though, and you'll get a really cool, digging sound with it. It's actually like a sound of someone. I got this recording of someone, punching a slab of beef. We were trying to get, a Foley thing that got cut from the game, so it's the only way to hear that. So that's, you don't have to, but please do it. Please do. And that's patreon.com/funandgamespod as well.
Yes, you can also find more amazing podcasts at certainpov.com, a few other shows that Jacob himself has been on as well. You can also join our Discord server. If you want to rate and review us, there's a link to our Apple podcast where you can rate and review us in the show notes below, as well as a permanent invite link to our Discord server where we ask questions like we asked today to get feedback on GameCube memories. You can join the conversation there and hang out. When we announce new stuff or do new stuff, we post it in the Discord for sure. And then all of the other places you can reach us, Geoff mentioned, you can reach me personally on Twitter and Instagram at DJ_Stormageddon, as long as those places still continue to exist. One never knows. And if you want to check out the other stuff I work on, you can go to DJStormageddon.com.
Fantastic. And yeah, we would love to hear from each and every one of you about the GameCube games you love, the other video games that have been important in your life, because an episode like this is a celebration of a period of time in gaming, one that has echoes throughout since its release, and it's fun to find those too and see those and continue that. And we brought what we know, and we like to think we know a decent amount, but we know so much more when we come together and have a conversation about it, because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Geoff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CPOV.
certainpov.com.